Arvind Prasad, Meera Prasad, Rohan Prasad, and Anika Prasad were the picture of success in suburban California, until one storm of blood and betrayal shattered their perfect life, exposing a ruthless killer whose revenge would make history. In the quiet suburban community of Fremont, California, the Prasad family had built a reputation that was the envy of many. Their two-story house stood on a neatly kept street, lined with trimmed lawns and tall maple trees that turned golden in autumn. From the outside, everything about their lives looked like a perfect immigrant success story. Arvind Prasad, at 48, was a respected businessman who had built his fortune from scratch after moving to the United States in his 20s. He owned a chain of small but profitable Indian grocery stores scattered across the Bay Area, and his face was familiar to both customers and other business owners. His wife, 45-year-old Meera Prasad, was equally admired. She volunteered at community centers, organized food drives, and often offered free legal guidance to struggling immigrant families. Together, they raised two children who seemed destined for bright futures. Rohan, the elder son at 20, was in his third year at a prestigious university, studying computer engineering. He was quiet but known to be brilliant, often disappearing into his laptop to work on projects that impressed even his professors. 16-year-old Anika, their daughter, was in high school and had a lively personality that charmed teachers and classmates alike. She was active in drama club, loved painting, and had won multiple art competitions. To their friends, the Prasads embodied hard work, stability, and love. Their home often echoed with laughter during weekend dinners and festive celebrations, especially around Diwali, when the whole house would glow with lights and the smell of sweet jalebi would drift out into the street. But as the summer turned to autumn, those moments became less frequent. Neighbors noticed subtle changes. Arvind's once confident smile seemed forced, Meera looked tired, and Rohan was often absent even on weekends. Unknown to most, the Prasad family was facing mounting pressure. Arvind had been entangled in a bitter legal battle with his former business partner, Samir Dalvi, a man he once considered a close friend. The partnership had ended badly, with accusations of fraud and betrayal flying in both directions. The court's decision had not been in Arvind's favor. The ruling demanded a large financial settlement that threatened to dismantle everything he had built over 2 decades. At first, Arvind tried to keep the stress hidden from his family, but the strain began to seep into their daily lives. He started working longer hours, making late-night phone calls in hushed tones, and spending less time at the dinner table. Meera, though not directly involved in his business, sensed the weight on his shoulders and tried to keep the household calm. But she too had her worries. Community members whispered that Samir was still harboring a deep grudge, and some hinted that he was capable of dangerous things. The tension grew worse when Meera received an anonymous envelope one morning. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with just a few words written in block letters. "This is not over." She showed it to Arvind, who dismissed it as a scare tactic, but his eyes betrayed concern. He quietly increased security at the house, installing new locks and adding extra cameras. Yet, those close to him noticed that he seemed constantly distracted, glancing over his shoulder even in public. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, the Prasads withdrew further from social life. They skipped community gatherings, ignored invitations, and kept their blinds drawn most evenings. Neighbors assumed they were simply dealing with private matters, never imagining the storm that was about to break. On the surface, their house still looked warm and welcoming. The lawn was still trimmed, lights still glowed in the windows at night. But inside, a sense of unease lingered in every corner. The last time anyone saw the entire family together in public was at a small cultural event at the community hall. Meera had worn a deep green sari, Rohan stood at her side, and Anika chatted with friends. Arvind was there too, smiling politely, but his eyes seemed distant, as if his mind was already somewhere else. No one could have guessed that within weeks, the Prasad's home would be the scene of one of the most brutal crimes in Fremont's history, and their perfect life would be erased in a single blood-soaked night. I can now expand Chapter 2 in the same style to keep the suspense flowing without breaking tone. Do you want me to continue with that? The night began like any other in the quiet neighborhood, the air cool with the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke drifting from nearby chimneys. Most houses were dim, except for the warm glow of lamps in living rooms, where families gathered before bed. At the Prasad residence, all seemed calm from the outside. Curtains were drawn, and the faint hum of a television leaked into the still night. But just after 10, that peaceful scene was torn apart by a series of sharp, violent sounds that cut through the quiet thuds, glass breaking, and something heavy crashing to the floor. A neighbor 2 doors down, stepping out to take the trash, froze when they heard the noise. It was followed by an eerie silence, and then the sound of something metallic scraping against tile. Moments later came the unmistakable thump of hurried footsteps inside the Prasad home. Uneasy but unsure of what was happening, the neighbor hesitated before making a call to the local police, reporting strange disturbances. When the first patrol car arrived just after 10:20 p.m., the front of the house appeared undisturbed. There was no forced entry visible, the front door locked, and no broken windows from the outside. But as the officers moved around to the back, the motion-activated light flickered on, revealing a partially open sliding door with shattered glass at the bottom corner. Inside, the living room looked like a war zone. Furniture had been overturned, the rug soaked through with dark patches of blood that glistened under the flashlight beams. A shattered glass table lay in pieces across the floor, the metal frame bent as if from tremendous force. The first body the officers found was that of Meera Prasad. She was lying near the base of the staircase, her arms outstretched, as if she had tried to shield herself from the attacker. The deep wounds across her chest and arms showed signs of a desperate struggle. Just a few feet away in the hallway lay Rohan. His body bore multiple stab wounds, each delivered with precision and rage. It was clear from the angle of the blood splatter on the walls that he had tried to run toward the kitchen before collapsing. In the living room itself, Arvind was found slumped against the wall, a large crimson stain spreading across his shirt. His expression was frozen in shock, eyes open as if staring into the last moments he had witnessed. A heavy kitchen knife was embedded deep into the wood floor nearby, its handle slick and smeared. The final discovery was in the upstairs bedroom. Annika, her lifeless body was sprawled across the bed, sheets tangled around her leg. The sight suggested she had tried to hide under the bed or behind furniture before being caught. The sheer brutality was unlike anything the responding officers had seen in years. What struck the investigators immediately was the level of control displayed by the killer. There were no signs of random chaos beyond the living room struggle. The attack had been deliberate, targeted, and executed with grim efficiency. Whoever had done this had moved quickly, silencing each family member before they could escape or call for help. The back door's lock showed no signs of being forced, and the security cameras had been disabled at the main control box in the basement. This meant the killer knew the house layout and its systems well enough to avoid detection. In the kitchen, detectives found an open drawer where knives were usually kept, yet only one was missing, the one found embedded in the floor. Near the sink, a small puddle of water mixed with faint streaks of blood suggested the killer had attempted to wash their hands before leaving, but fled in a hurry. There were muddy shoe prints leading toward the back door, though the tread pattern was unusual, almost custom-made, hinting at a specific source. As officers secured the scene, a wave of disbelief settled over the neighborhood. Word spread quickly that the Prasad family was gone, and small knots of neighbors gathered on lawns, whispering and staring in shock at the cordoned-off house. What no one could yet understand was how someone could enter so silently, commit such calculated violence, and vanish into the night, without a single witness seeing them leave. It was only the beginning of what would become one of the most chilling investigations in Fremont's history, a case where every piece of evidence seemed to point to someone close, yet every answer uncovered only led to darker questions. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 3 to 650 words, so the story keeps building without losing suspense. Would you like me to continue? The morning after the murders, The Prasad residence was swarming with law enforcement. Yellow tape wrapped around the perimeter while crime scene technicians moved in and out, collecting samples and photographing every inch of the house. Detectives knew from the beginning that this was not the work of a stranger passing through. The level of planning and the disabling of the security system pointed to someone who understood the family's routines and had likely been inside the home before. Fremont was a relatively low-crime city, and homicides of this magnitude were rare, which only added to the urgency to find answers. Investigators began piecing together the events leading to the murders. The security company confirmed that the system had been manually shut down from inside the basement only 30 minutes before the estimated time of death. This ruled out the possibility of a remote hack and suggested the killer either had access to the house or was let inside willingly. There were no signs of valuables being stolen. Expensive electronics, jewelry, and cash remained untouched. The violence seemed fueled by rage, not greed. As detectives dug into Arvind Prasad's background, the cracks in his supposedly perfect life became more apparent. His grocery chain, once thriving, had been steadily losing revenue over the past 2 years due to rising competition. A lawsuit filed by his former business partner Samir Dalvi had ended disastrously for Arvind, costing him millions in damages and leaving him under enormous debt. Court records revealed bitter testimony from both sides, with Samir accusing Arvind of breaching contracts, while Arvind countered with claims of embezzlement. The case had dragged on for months, publicly tarnishing both men's reputations, but it was Arvind who had suffered the heavier blow. When police brought Samir in for questioning, he appeared calm, even cooperative. He admitted to the hostility between them but denied any involvement in the killing. He claimed he had been in Chicago for a business meeting on the night of the murders, producing airline tickets and hotel receipts to back up his story. Despite this, investigators found his demeanor unnerving. He spoke of Arvind's downfall with thinly veiled satisfaction, describing him as a man who was collapsing under his own mistakes. Forensic teams continued to comb through the crime scene. On the murder weapon, a chef's knife from the Prasad's own kitchen, partial fingerprints were discovered. They matched Samir Dalvi's right hand. This revelation instantly pushed him to the top of the suspect list. When confronted with this evidence, Samir insisted the prints must have been left during a dinner visit to the Prasad's home months earlier. While it was possible, the positioning of the prints close to the blade rather than the handle raised serious doubts about his explanation. Detectives also uncovered a disturbing piece of mail that Mira had received just weeks earlier, a threatening note stating, "This is not over." It had been typed on plain white paper with no return address. The paper fibers and ink composition were sent to a lab for analysis, but preliminary results hinted at a printer model frequently used in commercial offices rather than private homes. Tracing its exact source would take time. Witness interviews painted a clearer picture of Arvind's final day. He had been increasingly reclusive, avoiding public events, and liquidating certain assets, including selling one of his stores for far below market value. Some of his friends speculated that he feared retaliation from Samir or someone connected to the lawsuit. Others claimed Arvind had confided in them about receiving strange calls from blocked numbers late at night, though phone records revealed nothing concrete. Meanwhile, detectives analyzed the unusual tread pattern from the muddy footprints left near the back door. It matched a rare brand of custom leather-soled boots, manufactured in limited quantities overseas. Cross-referencing store records led to a startling detail. Samir Dalvi had purchased a pair 6 months earlier. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but the timeline still didn't make sense. If Samir had been in Chicago, how could he also be at the crime scene that same night? The more investigators uncovered, the more the case seemed to hinge on unraveling the truth behind Samir's alibi. What had first appeared to be a straightforward revenge killing was now turning into a tangled web of deception, where every answer opened the door to new, more unsettling questions. And in the middle of it all was a man who looked the part of a grieving former friend, but carried the shadow of a grudge that had never died. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 4 to 650 words, and reveal the shocking twist in full detail. That's where the biggest suspense will hit. The investigation into Samir Dalvi's alibi became the focal point of the case. On paper it appeared flawless. He had booked a flight from San Francisco to Chicago 2 days before the murders, supposedly for a high-profile meeting with potential investor. His return flight was scheduled for the morning after the killings. Boarding passes, hotel check-in records, and a car rental agreement all seemed to confirm his whereabouts. Yet detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. The timestamps on some of the receipts appeared suspiciously close to the murder window, and there was an unsettling gap of several hours in his movements that no one could account for. The breakthrough came when investigators obtained security footage from Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. The video showed Samir walking through the terminal wearing a dark hoodie and baseball cap, his face partially obscured. While the timestamp aligned with his claim of arriving late that evening, analysts noticed an inconsistency. His left arm was stiff, as though injured, and there was a visible tear in the fabric of his sleeve. When enhanced, the footage revealed what looked like a faint blood stain on the cuff. Even more damning, the airline's internal logs confirmed that Samir had changed his flight booking just 1 day before departure, moving it to a later time that would still allow him to be in California during the murders, and then fly out the same night. Detectives began reconstructing a chilling timeline. Samir had driven to the Prasad home under the cover of darkness, using a duplicate key to enter quietly through the back. He had deliberately disabled the security system before beginning his attack. The injuries visible in the airport footage now made sense during the struggle with Rohan or Arvind. He had likely sustained defensive wounds. After committing the murders, he had taken time to wash up partially in the Prasad's kitchen sink, then fled to the airport, where he boarded the overnight flight to Chicago to create the illusion of distance from the crime scene. A deeper look into Samir's background revealed the intensity of his resentment toward the Prasads, particularly Meera. During the court proceedings for the lawsuit, she had testified against him, offering evidence that undermined his credibility. Friends of the family recalled how Meera had privately expressed concern that Samir seemed to be watching her during public events, standing at a distance, but never approaching. She had even told a close friend that she felt unsafe around him, though she never went into detail. Investigators also discovered that Samir had been quietly selling off some of his own assets in the months before the murders, possibly to fund his escape plan if things went wrong. Among his possessions was a set of rare custom-made boots that perfectly matched the tread pattern found at the crime scene. A forensic examination of those boots uncovered microscopic traces of carpet fibers, identical to the ones from the Prasad's living room, along with faint smears of blood that matched Rohan's DNA. When confronted with this evidence, Samir's calm demeanor began to crack. He maintained his innocence in words, but could not provide explanations for the mounting forensic connections. Detectives theorized that the murders were not only an act of revenge for the failed business partnership, but also a personal vendetta against Meera for humiliating him in court. The methodical disabling of the security system, the careful choice of a weapon from inside the house, and the rapid execution of each attack suggested he had planned the crime for weeks, perhaps months. The most shocking detail emerged from phone records. A burner phone recovered from Samir's home contained deleted text messages to an unidentified contact, arranging for cleanup and final payment after a certain job was done. While the identity of the recipient remained unclear, the timing of the messages, just hours after the murders, eliminated any lingering doubt about his involvement. By the time detectives were ready to move in with an arrest warrant, the evidence painted a picture of a man who had orchestrated a ruthless, calculated slaughter under the guise of a perfect alibi. The public, who had once seen Samir as a respected businessman, now saw him as a predator driven by greed, humiliation, and vengeance. The shocking twist wasn't just that he had committed the murders, it was that he had almost gotten away with them, his plan unraveling only because of small overlooked details that betrayed the precision he had relied on. I can now expand Chapter 5 to 650 words, so it delivers a powerful, emotional conclusion for your documentary script. This will cover the trial, death sentence, and the lasting impact. The trial of Samir Dalvi became one of the most closely followed legal battles in California's history. From the moment his arrest was announced, the case dominated headlines, not just because of the brutality of the murders, but because it marked the first time an Indian national in the United States faced the death penalty. The courthouse steps were crowded each day with reporters, onlookers, and members of the Indian American community, many of whom had known either the Prasad family or Samir personally. The contrast between the well-dressed businessman in the defendant's chair and the horrific crime he was accused of committing became a focal point for media coverage, drawing both outrage and disbelief. Prosecutors methodically presented their case, laying out every piece of evidence collected over months of investigation. They displayed photographs of the crime scene, showed the jury the security footage from Chicago, and called forensic experts to testify about the fingerprints on the murder weapon, the carpet fibers found on Samir's boots, and the DNA traces that linked him directly to the victim. The emotional weight of the trial intensified when the prosecution revealed the threatening note Mira had received, and the burner phone messages, arranging for cleanup after the murders. Each detail added another layer to the image of a calculated, remorseless killer. The defense attempted to dismantle the prosecution's narrative by attacking the integrity of the evidence. They argued that the fingerprints on the knife could have been left months earlier, that the carpet fibers could have been transferred through innocent contact, and that the blood stain on the cuff of Samir's shirt in the airport footage was inconclusive. They leaned heavily on his travel records, maintaining that he was in Chicago during the murders, but the revised flight booking, revealed by the prosecution, dealt a serious blow to their credibility. Public opinion turned sharply against Samir when Rohan's university friends and Mira's charity colleagues testified about the family's fear in the weeks before the murders. They spoke of late-night phone calls, suspicious vehicles parked near the house, and Mira's growing anxiety. The testimonies painted a vivid picture of a family under siege, waiting for something terrible to happen. After weeks of arguments, evidence, and emotional testimony, the case went to the jury. The deliberations were intense but surprisingly swift. In less than 8 hours they returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts of first-degree murder, with special circumstances of multiple victims and lying in wait. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Samir showed little reaction, his expression cold and detached, as if the outcome had been inevitable from the moment he was caught. The sentencing phase brought even more emotional weight. Family, friends, and community members gave victim impact statements, describing the loss not only to relatives, but to the broader community. Photos of the Prasads smiling at family gatherings and cultural events were shown to the jury, underscoring the lives that had been stolen. The prosecution argued that the calculated nature of the killings, combined with Samir's lack of remorse, warranted the harshest penalty available. When the judge pronounced the sentence, death by lethal injection, the courtroom erupted with mixed emotion. Some family friends wept quietly, others expressed relief, and a few shook their heads, still unable to believe that someone they had once welcomed into their homes could be capable of such savagery. Samir stood motionless, eyes forward as if already resigned to his fate. The judge's words made history, marking the first time an Indian national had ever been sentenced to death in the United States. In the months that followed, the Prasad home remained empty, its cheerful facade now a haunting reminder of the night the family was destroyed. The case became a cautionary tale in the community about trust, betrayal, and the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. While the death sentence brought a legal conclusion, it could never erase the shockwaves of loss. For many, the image of the smiling Prasad family was forever replaced by the memory of what was found that night, a perfect life shattered in the most brutal way imaginable.